This is the backup video for Ancient History on Wednesday, September 9th. So I'm going to bring it over here and we are going to commence the festivities. Yeah. First of all, yesterday you all were home and you got to listen to a bunch of conversation about the movies 2001: A Space Odyssey and Heat. Today, I'm going to involve you in that conversation, and you at home can watch passively. Okay, the question I have for any of you, make sure you have an open notebook, something to write on, something to write with, is if we take the Dawn of Man scene from 2001: A Space Odyssey as a beginning to the study of human history, and the Heat scenes as to the present day in the study of human history, what to you is the most interesting bit of progress we've made? In the long journey from savagery to civilization, what to you stands out as the most dangerous, the most interesting, the most wondrous, the most interesting to you? And I want you to explain it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So, we'll roll. If I roll a 13 or above, I'll take a volunteer or I'll re-roll. 7. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Miss.
Me? Okay.
Yeah.
So, like, the most interesting thing from
Yes, that's right.
For now,
yeah,
I think is the foundation of religion of Jesus Christ, that it's actually been very firm throughout the whole.
Yeah. If you are a person of monotheistic faith, a Jew, a Christian, or a Muslim, and frankly, other religions operate this way too, but I'm going to speak about that since that's what you referenced. God works through the process of history. God did not create a bunch of robots, nor did he create a perfect order for Earth. Human beings are granted choice, free will, is what it's called. And our free will can make us little angels or little demons. We can either be the greatest thing to happen or the worst thing to happen with our choices and with our free will. But from the moment of the original sin of Adam and Eve going through this story, God has been trying to get through to us thick-headed primitives. And what we're going to learn in the story of the course of the background to the 9/11 terror attacks is how God first appears to Abraham, the first monotheistic believer, how Abraham's experience leads to the Jewish faith, how the Jewish faith leads to the Christian faith, how the Jewish faith also leads to the Islamic faith, and the connection that all of these religions have. They all purport to worship God the Father, as Christians would call it. Jews deny that Jesus was the incarnation or the Messiah. Some Jews think that Jesus was a good prophet. Some Jews think that he was a false prophet or nothing. Muslims respect Jesus as a prophet and Moses as a prophet, but their real focus is on their prophet Muhammad, who supplants all of them. We have had wars, we have had peace, we have had understanding, we have had misunderstanding between the monotheistic theistic believers. But Christ appearing when and where he did at the beginning of the Roman Empire is what some believers call evidence that God works through the process of history. Christians believe that Jesus is the hinge of history, that everything turns on his incarnation. Everything before is fundamentally different from everything after. But in the case of why at the beginning of the Roman Empire? Because for the next 400 or 500 years, Christian missionaries have a giant empire. It's one of the only times in human history that the area from the Atlantic Ocean to the Iranian plateau is basically all under one government, a government that allows peaceful trade, peaceful travel. And that helps the spread of the Christian faith. It helps disseminate it. There's a line from the movie Jesus Christ Superstar, where in the moment of his death, Jesus is being tempted by Judas. And Judas asks, why did you appear in, Israel in 4 BC had no mass communication. Why did you appear in a place so backwards? Well, the answer is God works through history. If you're a believer, you believe that. And the fact that the Roman Empire existed helped spread Jesus' message. So for a believer, the religious aspect and the discoveries, the ongoing growth of religious thought is the most important thing. Thank you for saying that and for asking. Other thoughts, they can be of entirely different order. I see no volunteers, so I'm going to roll again. Okay. 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Miss.
I think what's most interesting about it to me was how their communication had advanced and like how different it was and like all the different things that had to go into them to speak the way that they do now and how much changes and everything.
The first advance in communication is language. We, according to evolutionary biology, our brains come millions of years before our voice box. Our voice box appears about 40,000 years ago. That's a moment ago in evolutionary time. Our voice box is what grants us the power to sculpt sound with precision. The human mouth and voice box can produce about 52 different phonemes. That's 52 or so distinct sounds. The English language uses about 30 of them. Like we don't use as a sound, but other languages do, like the Bushmen of the Kalahari. So we learn to speak. And instead of being prisoners of meat and bone in our meat and bone skulls, I can precisely tell you things. You can precisely tell me things. And as long as we agree upon the massive con game that is language, as long as we agree this is a glasses cleaner, this is a badge, this is a pen, we can have precise communications with one another. That's magical. Before the development of the voice box, following evolutionary biology, the history of man is the history of change in our bodies, which takes hundreds of thousands or millions of years. But from the voice box 40,000 years ago, 30,000 years into that, we developed the first farms. 5,000 years later, we have towns and cities and civilizations. Then we, very quickly end up with us, which is a highly developed, highly technological civilization. All of these things happen as a result of language. One of the more interesting things that happens, though, is 500 years ago. 500 years ago, there's a guy named Johannes Gutenberg. Gutenberg takes the principle of Chinese block printing, makes little tiny metal letters, and develops the world's first printing press. From Gutenberg's press, we get the ability of people to print Bibles and other books for everyday people to read. As of 500 years ago, we're no longer people of the word, we're people of the book. Our memories change. Before the book, we have bards who have tens or of thousands of lines of dialogue that they remember. But I'm going to turn the fan on. If you want to move, you can, but I need some. Those bards no longer need to remember all that stuff because you just write it down and it's there in a book. What happens as a result of the development of the book? Scientific revolution. Also, Protestantism. And 150 years of religious war. Roman Catholicism is a religion whose ritual is based in the spoken word and in participatory ritual. I grew up Catholic. I love Catholicism. But it is oriented towards that. Luther and Calvin, the first founders of Protestantism and Reformed Christianity, both say what we want to do is get past the traditions of the church and go back to the scriptures, like they're the source. With Gutenberg's press, enough people get Bibles and are able to translate Bibles into language that the way we look at Christ and at faith changes. And that produces 150 years of war between Catholics and Protestants, and a division between Catholics and Protestants that persists to this day. So the printing press is a big deal, right? I'm setting us up for something today. Less than 100 years ago, fewer than 100 years ago, the first radio station for profit, the first civilian radio station, KDKA, starts broadcasting. So we have telephones in our homes from like the 1900s, 1910s. We got radios in our homes from the 1920s, 1930s. We got televisions in our homes, passive audiovisual from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Then we get network computers in our homes from the 1990s. Now it's interactive. We are now no longer in the age of the book. We're in the age of the silicon chip. We don't know where it's going to go. The last time we had this kind of revolution in communications, we end up with 150 years of religious war, a scientific revolution, and a bunch of other major big-time changes. This time, who knows? Who knows what the changes are going to be? Will we end up with wetware, linking the human nervous system into a networked computer system, which I think would be horrible, but it would be very efficient? Are we going to use our technology to make the world more knowledgeable, or are we going to use it to control people? In China, they chip people like we chip animals at veterinary shelters. In China, they have a social credit system. The Communist Party monitors everything you do on cameras that are everywhere and on the internet. And if you're a good communist, you get more opportunities, more food, better jobs. You can live in a nicer place. On the other hand, if you have a low credit score, they may use you as a human organ bank. In Chinese communist prisoners, meditations, practitioners of what's called Falun Gong, which is not political, have been persecuted for the last 20 years in China like Christians under the Romans. Sometimes, if there's a kidney that can be sold on the international black market, the prison will take a kidney out of a living person or a lung. That's how technology and communication can make the world into a living hell. So technology, interactive communication technology, like anything else, like fire, like atomic bombs, can make the world a better place or can make the world significantly worse. It depends on how we use it. That's free will. Other thoughts on the growth and change between savagery and civilization? Miss,
Fire.
tell me about fire. How does fire change things?
Well, we can cook food, we can purify water, we can stay warm, we can see things at night.
Absolutely. And we can fight off grizzly bears, lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. But you have a guy with fire, and he can hold his own. Fire is the first weapon of mass destruction, and arguably fire is the origin of the human lifestyle. Before fire, we eat cold food like everyone else, get all the diseases that come with that. We're stuck in Africa or other tropical areas. Before fire, if we are wounded, we're going to get infected and die. Fire can change all that. You can cauterize wounds, cook food, as you say, and it can keep us warm. It can keep us able to see at night. It can give us a weapon. Definitely. Good. And what is the modern iteration of fire? Well, what powers all this stuff? Electricity. We have power in our homes now. Yes, Zoe.
The creation of essentially governments, laws, rules.
Tell me what government does for us.
Well, if you are on a more like capitalist
Yeah.
political side, I mean, at least with our government, we vote in who we want as president. We have a whole ton of extra branches so that no one person has too much power. And then on the dirty communist side, we got all the...
She was in my civics class last year, and therefore she's joking with me a little bit because she knows I really think that, and I do. But that's fine. That's just an opinion. You can love communism as you want. You're going to learn about it. Yes, go on.
They have a more control the entire civilization and sort of look at it. And essentially, thanks to the creation of government, we now live in a society.
Right. What government allows us to do is function together without killing one another. There's the old story about the old Western gunfighter who gets drunk one night, goes to sleep in his hotel room, and the guy on the other side of his wall is snoring too loudly. So he takes his Colt Peacemaker and blam, 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 kills him and goes back to sleep. That is a lawless society. It's an anarchy. If you want to see anarchy, look at the chop zone in Seattle that they had over the spring and summer. No laws, no police. There's a problem with having no laws and no police, and that is it's anarchy. And what will happen is the biggest, baddest, scariest people around are going to take what you have. They're going to take whatever they want. If they're stronger than you, that's what will happen. That's what always happens. I grew up and I lived in the central Bronx, near and in one of the poorer neighborhoods in this country. I can tell you, you need law and order, and government provides that. Government allows what's called the civilian lifestyle. The civilian lifestyle is what we're all leading. None of us are soldiers right now. We live in a home that we presume is not going to be destroyed by bandits or brigands. We travel to school without expecting to be robbed. We're here at school not expecting to be brutalized. Therefore, we can focus on our schoolwork, focus on our teaching, and when you're adults, you can make a life. You can have children, you can have yard parties, because we're protected by the police, by laws, and by the military. Government provides that. Government's primary job is to protect us from all enemies, foreign and domestic. But our government does even more. Our government gives us freedom, which is something we'll talk about. Communism gives everyone food and shelter. That's at least what they say, and that's what they bank on. Their propaganda is that capitalism and freedom is bad because it allows poor people to starve. Well, it can, although we have welfare. But communism makes sure that everyone gets the same material benefits. At least that's what it tries to do. So, any other thoughts on progress? Yes?
How the human mind has changed.
Tell me about that. That's an interesting one.
So, 100 years ago, they think way differently than we do now. And in the Space Odyssey one, that's totally different than now.
Yeah? Can you tell a difference between in the way people think that is a recent change?
Lots of certain situations have been put into light that changes how people think.
Can you give an example?
Like Black Lives Matter, ACAB, any problems that are going on in the world today.
Mm-hmm. I would call that less the human mind and more our sensibilities in society, our standards in society. Let me explain what I mean. In ancient times, people, when they read alone, read out loud. A Greek, a Roman, somebody in Jesus' time, somebody in Caesar's time, if they were reading a book, they would sound out the words, not because they're bad readers, but because that's the way it was. People didn't start reading silently until monasteries in the early Christian era in the Dark Ages. And I think that affects how people read and understand things. That would be a change in mind. But evolutionarily, we're not very different from the savages that existed at the very beginning of the first farms. Physically, we're the same creature. Our mind, in the sense of our brain, operates in basically the same way. What you're referencing, though, is change in society and its values and standards. And that is what is worth fighting for. What is worth living for, dying for, maybe even killing for. Because what you're talking about is control of the future. Is the future going to be a place where American freedom means that everyone has the opportunity to succeed or fail? Or is the American future going to be a place where those groups that have been marginalized in the past are going to have an extra opportunity that the formerly dominant group has lost? Are we a society about opportunity and choice? Are we a society oriented towards adjusting and justifying and bringing justice to grievance? Those are some ways of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is this. In my grandparents' generation, very good people were racists by modern standards. They've changed the definition of racism. In the old days, racism was hating people because they were different. Today, some people would argue that racism is thinking about people as being different because they are of different racial groups. Do you see the difference? Hating people because they're different is something that most people can say is bigotry and evil and wrong. Recognizing that different races come from areas of the world that produce very different cultures, that's not necessarily dark. It's not necessarily negative. In fact, you can't appreciate or understand history unless you understand the fact that Egypt is different from Babylon, is different from Greece, is different from Rome, is different from China or India. These things all matter. Culture changes. Values change. Would you accept that as a reasonable way of putting it? And that cultural change is a powerful thing. If you want last word, you got it, because you raised some very interesting points and I went on and on. So it's only fair.
I think you covered about everything that I was going.
Okay. I just didn't want to take advantage. I want to be square. We're gonna have to be quick, but Zoe, yes,
I
quick.
want to have a little bit of expansion on the last point that I kind of actually think that our minds haven't really changed over the course of like evolution, because when you look back at like kids when they were still toddlers or something, we kind of do a lot of the similar-ish things that we did back when we were still primitive, except it's rules and regulations this time. Like little kids are gonna end up going around on the playground wanting control of one space and sort of just like constantly flailing around.
Or bullying one another.
Yeah, and also the whole pronunciation thing you talked about when we read. That's for a lot of what, at least what I've seen, kids do when they're starting out on their reading.
Yeah.
So
I keep dropping. Gravity, I know you're working. You're right.
but I think it's because our minds have aged more over time, and I think that by the fact that we've been able to live longer since the primitive days, we've been able to sort of learn more, and that's why our heads sort of start to develop into something.
A related point to that, and this is a strange aspect of evolutionary biology. In our womb, we gestate. You have the fertilized egg that eventually becomes the fully born human being. To me, life begins at conception when the egg fertilizes. But that fertilized egg goes through all the various stages. At one point, it's very fish-like. At another point, fetus is very amphibian-like. Then it's very reptile-like. Then it's very primitive mammal-like, so like a rodent. Then it begins to develop like a primate, and then it begins to develop like us. So within the womb, the early human being is experiencing its own individual evolutionary processes as it's developing into becoming a human baby ready to be born. And that I think that's interesting. I don't know what it means. I just think it's interesting. Any other thoughts before we move on? See none. Okay. Would each of you please turn in your 2001 in Heat worksheets and get one of these? Get one of those. Thank you. What this is the new chapter survey form that I went over extensively in class yesterday. What you will notice, since you've got your own in your hand, there's also a copy of this on the Google Stream, and I'll have paper copies in the on the shelf there. Yes, you still have to do your matching, all 10 of them. Yes, you still have to do your multiple choice, all 20 of them. No, you do not have to do the chronology of putting things in order anymore. Yes, you still have to do 3 documents. Opposed views, maybe a third opposed views, or a third document of your choosing. Flip it. But on the back, you only have 2 essays, not 3. Now, these 2 essays can be from either section. There are 8 questions for critical thought, 8 analyzing primary source documents. You can pick 2 from one section or 1 from each of the 2 sections. Put the essay number and check off which section it's from. Questions for critical thought, analyzing primary source documents. So I have reduced your essays by 1/3, and I have taken off the chronology section. Any questions on the updated chapter survey? So you're going to do this for chapter 1. You're not going to do the one I gave you last week, because I've reduced your workload to what I think is the bare minimum. I see no questions. Okay, we move on. You guys also have to choose a creation myth. Now we I've changed the creation myth from an 8-minute, fairly formal endeavor to a 4 to 5 minute quick presentation. What I want you to do during that quick presentation phase is talk about something in the story that stands out, what the story says about human life, and what the story says about the nature of reality and existence. So 4 to 5 minutes, what the story says about what the story says that's interesting, what it says about people and why we're here and why things are the way they are, and what the story says about the nature of existence. And different myths are going to have different foci. So in a moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll a dice, and you guys will get to choose, and it will go clockwise. So if I roll like 6, it'll be boom, boom, boom. You'll get to choose first, you'll second, you're third. We'll go around the room, and you would go last. So that's if I were to roll 6. I'm going to have you roll, if you don't mind. Will you please? Thank you. 7. Close.
7.
You go first, you go last. We go around. So what I want you to do is tell me the myth and your name first and last, loud and clear so I can hear it.
Okay, I'll do the Japanese creation myth.
Okay, that is a vivid and interesting one. And your name?
Summerly Baldwin.
Okay. Now, I will tell you also, there are a few that are divided up. For example, Genesis has chapter 1 and chapter 2. The Greek have 3 myths, the Hindus have 3 myths. So more than one person can take Genesis, we'll just divide it up. What would you like, miss?
The Eva creation myth.
Okay, and what is your name?
Isabel Richardson.
Thank you. Okay, this is 4A. That means you're next.
Norse creation myth. Juliana Janae.
Got it.
Greek creation myth. Madison Burke.
Okay, Madison. There is a couple of Titan-oriented myths, and there's one myth called Urione and Ophion. Eurynomy and Ophion is sort of an interesting myth in that it deals with male-female stuff. The Titans deal with generational stuff. Which of the 2 Greek options do you think you'd like? Okay, so can you say your name again, please?
Madison Burke.
Thank you, Madison. You're going to have the 2 myths that are not Eurynomy and Ophion. So Titan myth. And you'll see it in the notepad. See what I'm talking about. Miss?
Oh, I would like the J.R.R. Tolkien creation.
Got it. And what's your name?
Mira Crawford.
Thank you, Mira. Zoe.
I'd like the Jewish creation myth.
Okay, you got it. Yes?
I have the other Greek creation myth.
Okay, yeah, you've got Eurynomy and Ophion. Can I have your name, please? Ella?
Jurassic.
Jurassic. Oh, okay. Miss? The what?
Pueblo.
Pueblo?
Pueblo, yes.
Okay. And where is that? Near the bottom, I think. Oh, Zuni and Pueblo. Good. Can I have your name, please?
Claudia Campbell.
Thank you, Claudia. Miss.
I'd like the Taoism.
Okay, and what is your name?
Eva Duffy.
Ava? Spell the last one?
Duffy.
Oh, Duffy. Okay. Thank you.
Persona,
Okay, and your name, sir?
Ryland Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon.
I'd like the Bible.
That is an interesting one. It's very action-oriented. Can I have your name, please?
Julia Pepin.
Julia? Say it again?
Pepin.
Pepin. I hate these masks. I can't see them. I know you, obviously. You were in my state class last year. Sir,
Valerian,
and your name?
Stanley Wells.
Okay. Got it. Okay, that's everyone. If you want to change your myth, let me know, but be ready to make a 3 to 4 minute presentation before the class where you teach the class about what your myth's about, what it says about human life, and what it also says about the nature of existence, the nature of existent reality. Okay, now we're going to shift into lecture mode, so please have your notes out. And what we're going to do is we are going to start the overture to the class. And the overture to the class is the historical background to the 9/11 attacks. You guys have grown up in a society that's been at war for a really long time, to the point where I don't think you've ever known a moment where we haven't had troops in Iraq or Afghanistan. But I remember, for a brief period in the 1990s, between the end of the Cold War with the Soviets and the 9/11 attacks, when I actually thought we were at peace, when we weren't involved in armed conflict on any kind of large scale with anyone. It's hard to imagine, if you've never known genuine peace, what that was like. But to understand 9/11, which is the beginning of our historical overture, because the origin of the terror attacks go back to the beginning. They go back to the prophet Abraham, the beginning of belief in one God. In telling you this story, I'm going to give you a hint of what we're going to cover from now until the end of the year. So, to understand the impact of 9/11, you have to imagine people, an American people that's relaxed, that's at peace. I'll give you a cute anti-image. When you're a young dad and you got a baby around, the baby will love jumping on you, particularly on your vitals. So there you are napping on Sunday, peaceful, and all of a sudden, kabam pow, the baby lands with its full weight in your most delicate area. Oh, you wake up. Ah! So, without all the cuteness and love and fun, in essence, that's what happened. So I'm going to start the story with my own experiences on the day. September the 11th, 2001 was a Tuesday. I was in Maine. It was a beautiful, sunny, clear day, like an autumn day, like the weather we've been having without the smoke. And I was in the beginning of my second full-time year of teaching. I was in a modular class, a room like this, and I had just finished talking about Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, cavemen and cavewomen, savages wandering around following their food. And we had a 10-minute break, and then I had a planning period 2. So after teaching, it's around 9 o'clock in the morning, Tuesday, September the 11th, I leave my classroom and I go to the lobby of the high school where there's a television suspended on the ceiling that's usually off, but it's on. And there's a group of people, a large group of people, on the stairs staring up quietly at the screen. Now, I went into the building with the intent of talking to the guidance counselor about getting a student shifted from one of my classes to another. And that's what was on my mind. I was a very hardworking teacher, very in the group, so I noticed everyone there. And I was going to talk to the guidance counselor, and I noticed he was one of the people standing there. And then I look up at the screen, and I see a jetliner crashing into one of the Twin Towers. Now, I'm a New Yorker, born in Manhattan, raised in the Bronx. I knew that each of those towers had been designed to hold about 5,000 people. And as I watched in mute horror, I saw that it was not just one plane, it was 2 planes, one hitting each of the towers. But I was disciplined. I was hardworking. So I look up at I said, okay, this is happening. I'll deal with it some other time. I'm going to do my job. So I start talking to the guidance counselor about switching this kid. And then the magnitude hits me. We're not going to talk about switching a kid. We're watching something that's unprecedented. So like everyone else, I watched until the end of break. And one of my colleagues had a cable television in his classroom, which he used. So we went up and we watched the towers burn. And we were all silent. And getting teachers to be silent is a difficult thing. When the first tower collapsed into its own basement hole, I couldn't take anymore. But by that point, I knew what had happened. I knew enough to do something about it, and I needed to do something about it. So I stood up. I said, without even thinking about it, this is war, and I left. And I went to my classroom, and I came up with the first version of what you're going to get over the next week or so, which is this historical background. And what I did, the reason I knew, is because Islamist terrorists had claimed credit for the attacks. And I had seen a video of women and men in the streets of the Palestinian regions of Israel cheering in the streets that the towers had fallen. And once I knew that Islamist terrorists had claimed credit, I knew why the attacks had happened. I knew what it was about, and I could do something. And for the next 2 days, I told this story, which you're going to get in greater detail, because I had to, because I needed to do something. At the end of the 2 days, I had brought them up to the present day. Oh, the kids were interested, because this had happened to them too. They were your age, and they saw it. And they didn't know what it was. They knew the world had changed, though. After the 2 days, I went back to my normal lessons, and I encouraged kids to stop watching the news for a while. Because by this point, one of the things my colleagues had said when we were watching the towers burn was, notice how they're not showing anything closer than a few miles away. The Twin Towers were so big, we could see them from our window in the Bronx, which is an entirely different region of New York City. That's how big they were. You could see them from many miles away. They didn't show anything close. By the Thursday or Friday of that week, they began releasing telephone communications of people in the towers. And they began showing close-ups of what happened near those buildings. That's not news. That's not going to inform you of anything. That's pornography. Pornography of death, not of sex. I encouraged my kids not to watch, unless the news had learned something new. Some listened, some didn't. My father and I talked about this. My father-in-law was a young man who knew guys who were killed at Pearl Harbor. He was going into the Navy. He became a Navy officer. He and my mother-in-law were both going to be part of the invasion of Japan. They and a lot of other people were saved by the atom bombs when Japan surrendered. The only thing in his experience was Pearl Harbor, which again came out of the blue. We were a people at peace, and then suddenly we're not at peace anymore. The world has shifted beneath our feet, and the world is different now. Well, what had happened was the past had reached into our very modern society and changed everything. Now what I'm going to do is explain to you the technical details of what happened that day. The Twin Towers were part of the World Trade Center in New York City. They were huge blocks of buildings designed by an architect named Yamazaki. The other target of attacks that day was the Pentagon. We'll get to that. Yamazaki was going to build the tallest buildings in the world, and he did so. These buildings were going to hold 5,000 people at full capacity each, so 10,000 people total. They were going to be taller than the Empire State Building. They were going to be the tallest buildings in the world, and they were for a while until the Sears Tower was built in Chicago. These buildings were built differently, though. A normal building has a structure like a skeleton inside and has walls on the outside that don't matter very much. A modern glass and steel skyscraper has walls that don't matter very much on the outside. They're sort of to be seen through. But what Yamazaki wanted was lots of open space within each floor. So he designed rigid outer walls, vertical slats of alloyed metal. And he built the outside, and it supported the floors within. The windows were floor to ceiling. And from the distance, the human eye sees light and not darkness. So from a distance, what it looked like was you were looking out through very thin slats and seeing the world beyond. But when you got closer, there were these narrow, long, tall windows. Too narrow for a person to fit through. And the structure of the outer walls held everything together. So the buildings are a lot like an invertebrate, like a lobster, or a crab, or a shrimp, not a vertebrate. These buildings were targeted because they were the center of the global economy. They were big office buildings. They were something that we Americans were proud of, and they were visible. But they were also targeted by very smart people who understood what those were, how the buildings were built, and therefore how to take them down. When we convene tomorrow, we'll talk more about that. But now I need to go through a couple of things with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the evacuation drill with you, and I'm going to cut the live feed. You guys at home have a few minutes to do stuff, and I'll see you tomorrow. We'll continue the story.